It was 449 years after our Lord's incarnation, when the Emperor Martianus succeeded to the throne, which he occupied for 7 years. He was the 46th from the Emperor Augustus. At that time, the Angles and Saxons were called in by the aforesaid king and arrived in Britain with 3 great ships. As Bede tells, about 1700 years ago, 2 brothers arrived at the shores of Britain. Their names were Hengist and Horsa. They sailed over the sea from Jutland with 3 ships under their command. With their arrival, the destiny of Britain would change forever, for the better or the worse. Welcome to Enthusiastical History. You're listening to the first episode of our new series, The Anglo-Saxon Britain. In this episode, we are going to observe the first stage of the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain and tell the story of the struggle between 2 tribes over land, religion, and culture. Post-Roman Britain was a chaotic place, a battleground, just like any other province of the falling empire. Roman control over Britain has been weakened as the empire itself were, and it is largely agreed by scholars to have ended completely by the year 410. Following that date, the Britons were independent of Roman rule, ruled by warriors warlords, which only brought more chaos and civil war, according to Gildas. British lands were under constant attack by barbarians, frequently being pillaged and plundered by the Scots and Picts. Saxons weren't foreign to the island either, as they too have been joining these raids from time to time. The beginning of the end for the Britons, however, was the aforementioned arrival of the brothers. It isn't clear whether they were invited there by the British King Vortigern as mercenaries, or if they were exiles from Jutland hired by Vortigern after landing on the shores of Britain. Either way, an agreement was made between the brothers and Vortigern. The British would give them land to settle and provisions to maintain their warband. In exchange, the 2 brothers would help defend against the invading Picts. They weren't the first choice for Vortigern. He first pleaded with Aetius for help. However, Aetius, better known as Flavius Aetius, was busy fighting the Huns. Therefore, he wasn't able to send help. Hence, the British king was forced to look for another ally, which he found in Germania. Hengist and Horsa have landed with their warband near Apspleet and were given the island of Thanet in exchange for their services. And they indeed served Vortigern well, at least in the beginning. They've managed to defeat and repel the invading Picts. Following their victory, they sent for their homeland, encouraging more of their tribesmen to come and settle in their new lands. After some time, the new protectors of Vortigern's kingdom turned against them. Gildas summarizes the process as follows. They first landed on the eastern side of the island, by the invitation of the unlucky king, and there fixed their sharp talons, apparently to fight in favor of the island, but alas! More truly against it. Their motherland, finding her first brood thus successful, sends forth a larger company of her wolfish offspring, which, sailing over, join themselves to their bastard-born comrades. From that time, the germ of iniquity and the root of contention planted their poison amongst us, as we deserved, and shot forth into leaves and branches, the barbarians being thus introduced as soldiers into the island, to encounter, as they falsely said, any dangers in defense of their hospitable entertainers, obtain an allowance of provisions, which, for some time being plentifully bestowed, stopped their doggish mouths. Yet they complain that their monthly supplies are not furnished in sufficient abundance, and they industriously aggravate each occasional quarrel, saying that unless more liberality is shown them, they will break the treaty and plunder the whole island. In a short time, they follow up their threats with deeds. And thus the war between the 2 tribes started. The first battle recorded in the chronicles took place near Aylesford in the year 455. There, 2 sides met in battle, and the Anglo-Saxons came out victorious, albeit with a price paid. Horsa was slain during the battle, which left Hengest and his son Ask as the leaders of the host. 2 years after that battle, another one took place in Crayford, again a victory for Hengest. Following the battle, he took control of the area, which would later come to be the Kingdom of Kent. The next battle took place in Wipedesflot in the year 465. It was a bloody affair, costly for both sides, and the Anglo-Saxon chronicles do not mention the result, which means it was either a victory for the Britons or a stalemate. Either way, the Anglo-Saxon advancement was checked for a while until 473, when, and I quote, Hengest and Esk fought with the Welsh and took immense booty, and the Welsh fled from the English like fire. In the year 477, a new wave of invaders landed at Kimmenshaw under the leadership of Ella. There, they slew the local British and forced the survivors to take refuge in woods. Ella eventually conquered the area, which would come to be known as Essex, and from him descends the East Saxons. The next important Anglo-Saxon leader to arrive was Cerdic. He arrived in the year 495 with 5 ships under his command, and he would become the first king of West Saxons. The House of Wessex, which in time would come to rule the whole island, claims descent from Cerdic. And so, following the start of the conflict, new tribesmen and leaders kept arriving in Britain, hoping to conquer new lands for themselves. There are several battles mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, most of which we will not mention, since there are very few details about any of them, so they are hardly worth mentioning as we can't even be sure about their locations. Gildas must have thought the same, as he doesn't mention those battles either. To put it briefly, Anglo-Saxons expanded rapidly, pushing the Britons further and further back. Bede tells the story, and I quote, Buildings both public and private collapsed and fell. By every altar priests and clergy were slain and murdered. Bishops and people, without regard for mercy, were destroyed together by fire and sword. Nor was there anyone who bestowed the rites of burial on those so cruelly slaughtered. Many of the miserable survivors were captured in waste places and stabbed in heaps. Some through hunger surrendered themselves into the enemy's hands and engaged to be their slaves forever in return for a maintenance. Some in sorrow went beyond the sea. Some timidly abode in the old country, and with heavy hearts ever lived a life of want in wood and wills and on lofty rocks. This, however, wouldn't last forever. After the case of defeats, a man rose up to stop the carnage, and I quote, Then, when the host returned to their home after expelling the inhabitants of the island, the latter began little by little to rouse up their strength and courage. Issuing from the obscure retreats in which they had hidden themselves, they began all with one consent to entreat heaven's aid, that they might not utterly and everywhere be annihilated. At that time their general and leader was Ambrosius, also called Aurelianus. He was of Roman origin, and a man of courage and moderation. In his time the Britons recovered strength and heart, and he exhorted them to fight and promised victory. And by God's help in the fight they did win the victory. And then, from that time, now the Britons, now again the Saxons were victors, till the year in which Mount Badon was beset. There they made a great carnage of the Angles, about 44 years after the arrival of the Angles in Britain. The British commander mentioned by Bede is none other than King Arthur himself, or rather the man who inspired the legend. The topic of Arthur is deeply complicated and controversial. Was Arthur a real historical figure? Was he a Roman commander or a Briton warlord? Was he a Christian? Or perhaps a British pagan? However interesting they may be, these questions are not for us to answer, and the answers do not matter much in our story. Therefore, we will avoid them. What matters to us is the result, and thankfully that one isn't as vague as Arthur. What we know is that the Britons gathered under a leader and managed to resist the invasion, winning victories here and there until their decisive victory in the Battle of Badon, which slowed the Anglo-Saxon expansion for a while. We don't know any details about the Battle of Badon, just like any other battle from the era. The location is debated, though it was probably somewhere on the frontier between the two peoples. Bede says the battle took place 44 years after the arrival of Anglo-Saxons to the island, therefore it is reasonable to assume the battle took place circa 500 AD. The British were led by Ambrosius. The Saxon commander isn't known, though it could have been Ella. While it's a topic of debate among scholars, I find it reasonable to believe that Saxons were led by Ella in Baden, considering the chronicles do not mention him after the year 490, and instead focused on the victories won by the West Saxons, led by Cerdic. Though, of course, there could be other reasons for that, such as Ella dying before the battle even happened, or perhaps soon after, or that the Anglo-Saxon chronicles were written by West Saxons who would naturally tend to focus more on the founder of their royal house rather than that of Essex. Whoever the Saxon commander was, it was a heavy defeat for his army, and the Saxon advancement was slowed down for decades. That being said, one would be mistaken to believe the Saxon advancement halted altogether. Warriors kept coming from the continent, looking to conquer and settle in Britain, as shown by an entry for the year 501 from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, which reads as, "This year Porta and his two sons, Beda and Mela, came into Britain with two ships at a place called Portsmouth. They soon landed, and slew on the spot a young Briton of very high rank." Neither Porta nor his sons are mentioned again in the Chronicles, nor in any other historical document I can find. It seems that they were defeated and pushed back after their initial success. However, their landing is nonetheless important, as it shows the migration didn't and wouldn't stop. And neither did the conquests. West Saxons under Cerdic kept expanding their borders. They fought the Britons in the year 508 in Natalie, slaying a British king in the battlefield. 11 years after that battle, the two sides clashed again at Chartford. There was another battle, 8 years from the one at Chartford, this time in a place called Cerdic's Lake. 3 years after that, the Isle of Wight was conquered by Cerdic. He died 4 years later, leaving the throne to his son, Kinric. Kinric's name is mentioned alongside his father throughout the Anglo-Saxon chronicles. Whenever battles are described, he is almost always there, which suggests that he was ruling the kingdom jointly with his father, which shows that he was already experienced in government and warfare when he became king, though his reign didn't last long. He became king in the year 552, fought and defeated the Britons at Beranbury in the year 556, and died in the year 560, leaving the throne to his son, Kevlin. Kevlin is a really important figure in West Saxon history, certainly the most important up until then. He was a mighty king, indeed the most powerful ruler of the Anglo-Saxon England at the time. He is the second Bretwalda in the list made by Bede. We'll take a deeper look into the term Bretwalda, but for the moment being, it is enough for you to know that it meant the Emperor of Britain and was used by Bede to describe Anglo-Saxon supreme kings who held authority over other kings. Ceawlin's first battle as king was not against Britons, but against other Saxons. He fought against Ethelbert of Kent in the year 568 and defeated him. This battle is an important storm-mark in the history of Anglo-Saxon Britain, as it is the first recorded conflict between the invading Germanic tribes. Up until then, Anglo-Saxons had been fighting the natives only, as far as we can tell. This battle suggests that the Anglo-Saxon invaders were now firmly settled in Britain, since they felt comfortable enough to fight between each other. That obviously doesn't mean the hostilities between Wessex and local British kingdoms ceased. West Saxons under the command of Cuthulf, a grandson of Ceawlin, fought with the British at Bedford and seized control of four towns, namely Lenbury, Aylesbury, Benson, and Ensom, following their victory. 6 years later, another victory was won by the West Saxons under Ceawlin at Durham, resulting in conquest of three cities, Gloucester, Cirencester, and Bath. 7 years after that, in 584, Ceawlin defeated the Britons once again, this time at Fethern, taking many towns and immense booty. Another 7 years passed, and Ceawlin fought again, this time at Wanborough. The chronicle doesn't mention any details about the battle. All it says is that great slaughter was made and Ceawlin was driven out of his kingdom, which is enough to understand that Ceawlin lost. The opponent probably were the British, possibly supported by the Angles or even West Saxons under a dynastic rival and the next king, Ceolfric. Ceawlin died either 1 or 2 years after the battle, and his death, along with the defeat at Wanborough, created a power vacuum in the south, of which Ethelbert of Kent took advantage of. Ethelbert is the third Bretwalda, as well as being the first Anglo-Saxon king to accept Christianity. We will talk about him in detail in our next episode. And at the same time a great man, Ceawlin, died, another one rose in the north. Ethelfrid succeeded to the kingdom of Bernicia, and in time he would lay the foundations of the kingdom of Northumbria. Until now, we focused exclusively on the southern Britain. There are two reasons for that. One being that the Anglo-Saxon invasion first started in the south, and the second one is that we have limited sources for the era, and the main source, Anglo-Saxon chronicles, were originated in Wessex, so they naturally focus on the southern part. There were, of course, chronicles of Angles, however, those are lost to history as they were kept in monasteries, which were primary targets for the Norse raiders of the Viking Age, and the lands of the Angles were the battlegrounds. Still, some information about what is going on in the north can be found in the Southern Chronicles. An entry from the year 547 mentions Ida's arrival in the north. From him descends the kingdom of Bernicia and later Northumbria. He defeated the local Britons upon his arrival and built the Bamburgh castle, which would become the capital of his newly found kingdom, Bernicia. Around the same time, there was another Anglo kingdom emerging to the south of Bernicia, Deira. If there's little known about the first years of Bernicia, there's even less about that of Deira. The first recorded king of Deira is named Ella, crowned in the year 560 according to the Anglo-Saxon chronicles. So, towards the end of the 6th century AD, there were two Anglo kingdoms north of Humber. Bernicia, with its power base around Bamburgh and Deira, ruled from Ethelvic. They would be united by Ethelfrid of Bernicia in the year 604, laying the foundations of the kingdom of Northumbria. Ethelfrid was the most successful of Anglian kings until his time. He crushed the Britons first, and then the Irish within a span of just 3 years. 1 year after his victory over the Irish kingdom of Dalrieta, he took the throne of Deira, either by force or political maneuvers, likely by a combination of two. He would eventually lose to another great Anglo leader of the era, an event which we'll cover in our next episode. So, things stood as such in Britain at the beginning of the 7th century. Anglo-Saxon presence in the eastern parts of Britain was now strongly established. The British were pushed back, and what was once theirs were now Lilover, the lost lands. With the British weakened severely, the new masters of the island would turn on each other to exert control over their neighbors, and Christianity would be introduced to the Anglo-Saxons by Saint Augustine and start its rapid spread. In our next episode, we are going to witness the Gregorian mission and the power struggles between Anglo-Saxon kings. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.